Imagine for a moment that you are the Prime Minister of Australia. You wake up in the middle of the night with a terrifying realization. You realize that the single most important asset for the survival of your nation, your navy, is entirely dependent on a company that doesn't answer to you. It answers to a board of directors in London. You look at the contracts. The frigates that will escort your convoys? Built by BAE Systems. The nuclear submarines that are the most expensive project in your history? Built by a joint venture led by BAE Systems. The over-the-horizon radar that watches your northern approaches? Maintained by BAE Systems. The missile decoys that protect your sailors from incoming vampires? BAE Systems. The autonomous systems on your new drones? BAE Systems. On paper it looks like a corporate coup. It looks like the colonial days have returned, where Australia simply writes checks to the mother country and hopes for the best. Critics in the press are calling it the BAE monopoly. They argue that Canberra has foolishly handed the keys to Australian sovereignty to a foreign entity, creating a single point of failure so massive that if London ever says no, the Royal Australian Navy stops sailing. It is a powerful, anxiety-inducing narrative. It plays into our deepest fears of being a client state, a little brother who pays for the toys but doesn't own the factory. But here is the uncomfortable reality that the critics are missing. This isn't an accident. It isn't a mistake. And it certainly isn't a surrender. It is a calculated, ruthless, strategic masterstroke. Australia hasn't been bought. We have bought it. We have bought a controlling stake in the most powerful, integrated, industrial war machine in human history. We aren't being colonized, we are being weaponized. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are dissecting the controversy that is tearing the Australian defense community apart. The BAE supremacy. Here is the thesis for this episode. The West can no longer afford to fight as three separate nations. The United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia cannot have three different supply chains, three different hull designs, and three different manuals. Against the mass production capacity of the Chinese Communist Party, fragmentation is suicide. The answer is the Anglosphere arsenal. We are witnessing the merger of the industrial bases of the three AUKUS powers. BAE Systems is the glue holding it together. We are going to break down the sheer scale of the empire down under, just how deep the rabbit hole goes. We are going to expose the Osborne loophole, the specific clause in the contracts that forces BAE to transfer their brainpower to Australian workers. And we are going to wargame the interchangeable fleet strategy. Why having a British-designed ship with an American combat system built in an Australian yard is the ultimate nightmare for a Chinese admiral. This is a story about corporate power, national sovereignty, and the realization that in 2026, you don't fight wars with flags, you fight them with franchises. If you're ready to understand why the Union Jack is flying over the shipyards of South Australia, and why that's actually a good thing for Australian independence, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We investigate the deals that define the battlefield, the map of dominance. Let's start by validating the fear. If you are an Australian taxpayer, you have a right to be nervous when you see just how much of your money is flowing into the accounts of one specific British multinational. To understand the BAE monopoly, we have to look at the map of Australian defence infrastructure. BAE Systems Australia isn't just a contractor, they are effectively a branch of the military. Start in South Australia at the Osborne Naval Shipyard. This is ground zero. Here, BAE Systems Maritime Australia is the prime contractor for the Hunter-class frigate program. This is a $45 billion project, initially $35 billion, but inflation is real, to build 9 of the most advanced anti-submarine warfare ships on the planet. For a decade this project was controversial. The design, the British Type 26 Global Combat Ship, was chosen over Spanish and Italian rivals. Critics screamed that it was a paper ship, that it was too heavy, too slow, and too expensive. But the government doubled down. Now shift your gaze to the submarine sheds right next door. Under the AUKUS Pillar 1 agreement, Australia is building the SSN AUKUS, a nuclear-powered attack submarine. Who is building it? A joint venture between ASC, the Australian government-owned shipbuilder, and, you guessed it, BAE Systems. Why BAE? Because BAE builds the Astute-class and Dreadnought-class nuclear submarines for the Royal Navy in Barrow-in-Furness, UK. They hold the nuclear propulsion secrets. They hold the reactor designs, along with Rolls-Royce. So, the two most important naval assets for the next 50 years, the Hunter frigate and the nuclear submarine, are both controlled by BAE. But it doesn't stop at the water's edge. Go to the scorched earth of the Australian outback. Look at the Jindalee Operational Radar Network, JORN. This is the Eyes of the North. It is an over-the-horizon radar that bounces signals off the ionosphere to detect threats thousands of kilometers away. Who maintains it? Who upgrades the software? BAE Systems. Look at the Nulka active missile decoy, the hovering rocket that lures anti-ship missiles away from Australian ships. It is Australia's most successful defense export. Who manufactures it? BAE Systems. Look at the Ghost Bat, the loyal wingman drone. While Boeing is the prime, BAE Systems Australia provides critical vehicle management systems and autonomy tech. It is everywhere. It is the empire down under. BAE employs over 6,000 people in Australia, a number that is rapidly climbing toward 10,000 as the nuclear submarine task force spins up. The single point of failure: anxiety. The strategic anxiety here is obvious. In supply chain theory, this is called concentration risk. If BAE Systems were to collapse financially, unlikely but possible, the Australian Navy collapses with it. If the UK government decided to diverge strategically from Australia, say if a future British Prime Minister decided to pull back from the Indo-Pacific to focus on Europe, could they exert pressure on BAE to slow down Australian projects? Could they withhold the IP? Could they throttle the supply of spare parts for the Hunter class to prioritize the Royal Navy's Type 20 SAXS during a crisis in the North Atlantic? These are the questions that keep the sovereignty hawks awake. They argue that by choosing the British design for the frigate and the British partner for the submarine, we have essentially decided to outsource our brain. They argue that we are no longer an independent nation but a franchisee. We are running a McDonald's of defense, where the menu, the ingredients, and the uniform are all decided by the head office in London. If this were a purely transactional relationship, where Australia just buys the ships and BAE delivers them, the critics would be right. It would be a disaster. But the AUKUS agreement and the Hunter contract are not transactional. They are transformational. And this brings us to the loophole that changes everything: the brain transfer. The fundamental misunderstanding about the BAE deal is the difference between buying a ship and buying the ability to build a ship. Australia didn't just write a check to BAE and ask for delivery in 2035. The contracts contain what I call the Osborne loophole, a massive, legally binding requirement for technology transfer and sovereign capability. BAE Systems is the brain. They have the naval architects who design the Type 26. They have the nuclear physicists who understand the pressurized water reactor. They have the decades of experience building complex warships in Glasgow and Barrow. But Australia is the muscle. The deal requires BAE to download that brain into Australian bodies. Walk through the Osborne Naval Shipyard in 2026. You don't see thousands of British workers flying in, welding the ships, and flying out. You see Australian apprentices. You see Australian welders, pipe fitters, electrical engineers, and project managers. BAE is contractually obligated to train this workforce. They are sending hundreds of Australians to the UK to work on the British Type 26 and Astute programs, not just to watch but to do. These Australians then return to Adelaide, carrying that knowledge in their heads. This is the loophole. Once that knowledge is in an Australian brain, it stays there. You cannot repossess education. You cannot embargo experience. By forcing BAE to build these ships in Adelaide, using Australian steel from BlueScope, and Australian supply chains, Canberra is effectively using BAE to bootstrap its own industrial revolution. We are using a British company to build an Australian sovereign industry. If in 20 years Australia decides to kick BAE out, the factory is still here. The workers are still here. The know-how is still here. BAE is essentially building the machine that could one day replace them. The steel reality of 2026. Let's look at the physical reality on the ground right now. The prototyping phase for the Hunter class is done. The steel is being cut for the first ships. The sheer scale of the digital shipyard at Osborne is something the world hasn't seen outside of the United States. It is fully automated, digital twin-enabled, and optimized for continuous shipbuilding. BAE Systems isn't just building a hull, they are building a digital thread. Every bolt, every wire, every pipe in the Hunter frigate exists in a digital model that Australia owns. This means that Australia can modify the ship. We aren't locked into the British configuration. In fact, we have already deviated. The Australian Hunter class is significantly different from the British Type 26. We replaced the British radar with the Australian CA-CFAR radar, the best in the world. We replaced the British combat system with the American Aegis system. This proves that BAE isn't a dictator, they are a contractor. We told them, take your British hull, cut a hole in the top, and put in this Australian radar and this American computer. And BAE said, yes, sir. That is not the behavior of a monopoly master. That is the behavior of a service provider. Australia is leveraging BAE's platform to host Australian sovereignty. We are using their hull as the truck, but we are putting our own engine and our own gun on the back. The Osborne loophole is the mechanism by which Australia avoids the client-state trap. We are paying BAE billions, yes. But in return, we are extracting the one thing money usually can't buy: generational institutional knowledge. We are learning how to be a Tier 1 naval power. And BAE is the tutor. The plug-and-play warfare. Why did we choose BAE? Why did we choose the British design for both the frigate and the sub? Was it just nostalgia for the Empire? Was it because the Prime Minister likes tea? No. It was for a specific, hard-nosed strategic reason: interchangeability. This is the core concept of the Anglosphere arsenal. In World War II, one of the biggest problems the Allies faced was that British parts didn't fit American tanks, and American ammo didn't fit British guns. It was a logistical nightmare. In a future war with China, in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific, logistics will be the difference between victory and defeat. By choosing BAE systems and the Type 26 design, which Canada also chose, the West has created a global combat ship. The UK is building 8 Type 20 SIXS. Australia is building 9 Hunters. Canada is building 15 surface combatants. That is a combined fleet of 32 ultramodern anti-submarine frigates that share the same hull, the same engines, Rolls-Royce MT-30, the same basic layout, and largely the same supply chain. Imagine this scenario. It is 2032. A conflict has erupted in the South China Sea. An Australian Hunter-class frigate, HMAS Flinders, takes a missile hit to its propulsion machinery. It manages to limp away, but it is thousands of miles from Adelaide. It cannot go home for repairs. But it doesn't have to. It limps into the British naval base at Diego Garcia, or a port in Canada. Because the Canadians and British are operating the exact same ship, they have the spare parts on the shelf. They have the mechanics who know exactly how to fix the gas turbine. They pull the Australian part out, slot the British part in, and HMAS Flinders is back in the fight in 48 hours. This is the strategic genius of the BAE monopoly. It creates a universal spare parts network across the entire planet. The hybrid beast, British steel, American brains. But it goes deeper than just nuts and bolts. It goes to the software, the brains of the fleet. This is where the AUKUS genius really shines. The Australian SS AUKUS submarine will have a British hull design, BAE, a British reactor, Rolls-Royce, but it will use the American and /BYG-1 combat system and the American Mark 48 heavy torpedoes. This is the Frankenstein model, taking the best parts of each ally. Why is this crucial? Because it means an Australian submarine can shoot American ammo. If HMAS Attack runs out of torpedoes in the middle of a patrol, it can rendezvous with a US Navy supply ship or pull into Guam. The US Navy loaders can lower their standard Mark 48 torpedoes into the Australian sub, and the software will recognize them instantly. We have achieved total interchangeability of lethality. BAE Systems is the integrator that makes this possible. They are the ones doing the hard engineering work of making the American square peg fit into the British round hole. This allows the Royal Australian Navy to fight as a seamless extension of the US Navy and the Royal Navy. We aren't just allies, we are integrated. We are plug compatible. To a Chinese strategic planner, this is terrifying. It means they aren't fighting 3 separate navies with 3 separate logistical tails. They are fighting one giant, distributed, redundant fleet. If they sink the Australian supply ship, the British one can feed the Australian fleet. If they bomb the Australian shipyard, the Canadian shipyard can build the replacement parts. This redundancy is what wins long wars. And BAE Systems is the architect of that redundancy. The franchise model. So, is the UK owning Australian defense? In a corporate sense, yes. BAE Systems holds the contracts. They are making the profit. But in a strategic sense, absolutely not. Australia is owning the capability. We need to stop thinking about national defense industries as isolated islands. The era of purely national autarky is over. No nation, not even the US, can build everything alone anymore. The costs are too high and the technology is too complex. The West has moved to a franchise model. Think of the Anglosphere as a giant corporation, Democracy Incorporated. The USA is the R&D division, Silicon Valley, Skunk Works. The UK is the Specialized Design Bureau, Nuclear Propulsion, ASW hulls. Australia is the Southern Manufacturing Hub and the Forward Operating Base. BAE Systems is simply the logistics manager facilitating this merger. By leaning into the BAE monopoly, Australia has secured its place at the top table. We aren't buying off the shelf anymore. We are partners in the program. We have a seat on the board of the design team. Conclusion. The BE monopoly is a scary headline. It sells newspapers. It riles up nationalists. But when you look at the steel being cut at Osborne, and when you look at the strategic logic of the AUKUS Pact, the fear evaporates. We didn't surrender to a British monopoly. We bought a stake in the greatest defense franchise in history. We have traded the illusion of total independence for the reality of total integration. We have accepted that in a world of giants, it is better to be part of a team than to be alone. To counter China's mass production, the ability of Beijing to churn out destroyers like sausages, the West realized it can't fight as three separate, bickering defense industries. We have to fight as one giant, integrated, Anglosphere arsenal. Australia just became the factory floor for the Southern Hemisphere. The Union Jack may be on the BE letterhead, but the steel is Australian, the sailors are Australian, and the missiles are pointed north. And that is a trade-off worth making. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you think the risk of relying on a British company is too high, or is the interoperability worth it? Let us know in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay integrated, and we'll see you in the next one.